let's see. Hey, Stuart. Hi, it's I had a little bit of a break, so oh,
Yeah,
Tim's here.
Yeah, I grabbed a cup of tea.
Yes. Hey, Tim. Hi, we invited you to a very early morning thing, but once it got started, I wasn't able to thing, but maybe we'll get you a transcript later of what happened, but it was a very, what did you think, Stuart? I mean, well, Stuart wasn't sure.
Yeah, well, Tim, sorry for the late notice. I only spoke to Craig last night about the possibility of opening the door
a little bit
to a few other people. So you were obviously on the list, so you got your notice extremely late.
Yes, it's too late for me.
My
yes.
apologies. Maybe, Craig, if we do it again, maybe we could see if there's another time or
anytime, Stuart, you name it.
But just facilitate people that it's not sort of mad early in the morning.
Yes, exactly.
Or maybe that's fine. You know, I don't know. It's fine
no,
for me.
I mean, well, you know, the main thing, Stuart, is if you can pick a time that's good for you, I'm available anytime.
Yeah, well,
I don't know about anybody else, but you know, anyway.
Between 2 and 4 Saturday afternoon, sure. What else would I be doing?
Okay, sure.
Do you know?
Yeah.
I do me fishing on Sundays, so that's.
Yes, well, it's that's what Amy wants to do. If we ever go to County Mayo, she wants to have you take her fishing.
Mayo.
Oh, Mayo. Yes. Why do I say Mayo? Yeah. Anyway, well, I thought we just go through. We'll see who shows up. I think everybody else is probably tired, but I just wanted to kind of tie in some of the things that you know, Stuart Control said, along with what Jeffrey Raff is saying, because it's so close, you know. And the one thing I mentioned this morning, you know, when in kind of the follow up to it was the sense of experiencing the aliveness that that Stuart's talked about. And you know, there is in practice 5. Oh, here Steve's here. Good. And Sandy's here. Okay, now everybody's coming in. Okay. Hey, Sandy. Hey, Steve. How are you doing, Steve? Yeah, we're just getting started here. We were going to go through the, you know, some of the experiences, of course, Stuart's had, you know, his control says to us, he says, I realize that you have a little more restricted means of communication than our friend Stuart, you know. So we're going to kind of go over the, we would like to not have as restricted a method of communication, but that might be a blessing and a curse. But anyway, we're just talking about, you know, Stuart had mentioned when we're going into active imagination, and we're just applying it to the ally work, is the sense of aliveness. Well, I found a lot of different ways of expressing that sense of aliveness that can kind of open it up a little bit, and I've been using it myself. Is in practice 5, you know, Jeffrey Raff talks about the sense, the experiencing deeply the felt sense. Okay, now the one thing about the experiencing the aliveness, experiencing this felt sense, and Jung called it experiencing the lumen natura, which is the light of nature. So it's not, you know, the light of the Buddha. You know, it's a light that's more linked to living beings, the light out of which, emanated life, this lumen natura, which is kind of a more of a feminine light, and it has more to do with the rooted earth and stuff. So, in my own active imaginations, I tried to, bring forth. Well, first I was doing exercise 5, which was basically, sensing the light of Poimander. So you go into a active imagination with the goal of experiencing the light of Poimander, and Poimander was the control or guide of Hermes Trismegistus, you know. So, Hermes Trismegistus is normally everybody else's guide, but this was his guide. And he asked him, or Poimander showed him the light. And after that, everything started to fall into place in the imaginal world. And, Patrick calls it an expansion of awareness. The other thing is that it involves um, uh, uh, oh, the ability to perceive. Now when we're talking about the felt sense and all that thing, I think it's the ability to perceive, not only in your head, but in your heart and in your hands and in your feet and in your entire body. I mean, just become a being of perceiving, you know. And when you go into this world, you become, I mean, the whole learning process, and Stuart, maybe you can speak to this, is learning the ability to become aware of something, becoming an organ of perception in all of the different aspects of your being, which is broken up into so many parts. There's the Sephirotic tree of the Kabbalah. That every one of those limbs on the Sephirotic tree is another organ of perception, which is the expansion of the imaginal world. The world imagination comes from the root to magnify, and it means to expand consciousness. But anyway, what we're talking about, Stuart, is what do you have to say about as far as the difference between the felt sense and being an organ of perception, or how does that fit in with what you've done and experienced? Okay, let me just unmute you. There you go. Okay, unmute you. I got to unmute you, Stuart. Yeah, there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
As I read the book myself, the bits that I've read in it anyway, it's so spot on. It's like this is probably the closest book that I've ever read out of all the different types of books on this subject. This seems to be the closest to what I've experienced in my own development in doing this. So I would follow it to the letter.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would recommend. Now, having said that, I think it's important to recognize that where we're beginning from in varying degrees is our head. We're living in a head world, and we meet it with our heads, and we're living out of our heads, and everything is computed through our heads. So we're at the furthest distance from this. Where we're beginning from is the horizon, and we have to work our way back in from the horizon to where the doorway is. So I think it's really important to recognize the dismantling that needs to happen. We need to destructure ourselves in the process of approaching this. This is approached with a sense of the sacred, with a sense of openness, through a sense of not needing to understand it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't try, like, understanding something is to overpower it, in a sense. It's to overcome it. You're nearly dissecting it as it's happening, which is destroying it. You've got to enter into the aliveness with this, which is to leave it alone, let it build, let it show you what it is. Do you see? Don't bring your head to it. You bring your head to it, you'll come out. You'll step out. You go back to the horizon. Start again. Okay. And what you're going to find is, as you do this work, it's going to start teaching you how far off the mark your understanding actually was. How lacking your understanding was. Do you see? How limited the mind is. The mind of the head is. So the felt, I would say the entry into it is directly through the felt sense, which is experienced through a process of following the aliveness within yourself, which may be felt as a vibration, may be felt as a movement. How I feel it in myself is like the beginnings of movement, the beginnings of where movement comes from. It's like my body just begins to move. I can feel it starting to be animated, and I just sit there. I if I was sitting for development, that's where I would sit. I wouldn't try to develop the movement too quickly. I would just stay with that presence, stay with that power that moves me, and let it do what it does. And gradually, what will happen is you will begin to get to know that space in yourself where the beginnings of animation happens, where the beginnings of this relationship happens. And it, you become body conscious. You become conscious of your body. The body will become conscious of itself. And I think that's the beginning, and that's what Raf is saying, more or less, I think. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, becoming an organ of perception in your entire existence is this is the door into this world. I find, and is this, and maybe other people can speak to this, is in an active imagination. It's difficult for me to think from my heart. When I think, it seems to come from a right, where about the third eye is. I mean, that's where that's where I put the luma natura, or the aliveness, or the felt sense, is I put it right here. But when I feel that, I know that my ego is a little bit off to the side, as you're saying. If I can feel that a vibration here, then I know that at least I'm a little more open than I am when my brain is just like this stark thing. I keep having to tell it in the morning when I'm reading, quiet my mind, because it's just, I can feel how boxy it is, and
Okay,
and then I
great.
try to read or actually experience through through someone else's eyes. I mean, this is one of, I think, the beauty of what Jeffrey Raff says is, especially for beginners, okay, is if everything seems ordinary and nothing seems real when you're doing the act of imagination, and it just all seems very, there's nothing about it that is magical and everything. What Jeffrey Raff says is that you ignore that, and you assume the roles of the others. Like, say if you wanted to speak to a dream figure, and so you're doing an active imagination, you're going to speak to this dream figure. Well, and nothing's happening. Well, he says, well, you just become the dream figure and you talk to yourself. Now Jung brought up a very interesting image of this when he was telling a woman. I mentioned this last night. He was telling a woman she had a dream about being a cocoon and a caterpillar, and he becoming caterpillar out of a cocoon. And he asked her, he says, well, what do you think of cocoons and caterpillars? He's trying to get her to amplify this image. And she's, I have no thoughts at all. I never even thought about caterpillars or cocoons. And Jung, his jujitsu on this was, he said, well, what do you think I think about cocoons and caterpillars? And suddenly now she's just talking up a blue streak. She knows all about what Jung thinks about cocoons and caterpillars. So to me, this is pretty much what Jeffrey Raff is saying about developing these organs of perception that allow you admittance to the imaginal world. Is the way to develop it is to you go into this state, you try to feel the aliveness or the lumen natura, and then you assume the roles of the other. And I always try to see myself, and I kind of do a little bit of a practice before I started. The other figure, I say, I am thou, and then I go into them and I say, and thou art I. And in both cases, I try to grab the hand of myself, and then I try to grab the hand of the other when I'm in those. And I just try to go back and forth. And it's just to develop this ability of joining minds. This is what Patrick is saying is happening. Is he says it's a very delicate process to join minds. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, Craig, just to add to that, in Gestalt, it's called an intrapsychic dialogue, creating an intrapsychic dialogue. And it's just like using an empty chair, using a cushion, talking to the cushion type of thing. There's a guy on YouTube called Genpo Roshi that does an exercise called Big Mind, Big Heart, if you've ever seen it, where he's dialoguing with the parts, exactly the same. So what I'd be suggesting to people would be, on some occasion, start using content from your dreams. And if there's a dream that you feel I can't get the meaning out of it, go into that dream, create it in your mind, and talk to the table, talk to the ceiling, talk to the light bulb, talk to the candlestick, talk to the brick in the wall, and give it a voice, and become the brick in the wall, and allow it to talk back to you.
That's beautiful.
It could be silly little conversations. It doesn't matter. Just begin the dialogue. Start to have a dialogue. Oh, well, what's it like to be a brick in the wall? Oh, a bit boring. I just sit here doing nothing all day. Tell me about yourself. Well, I'm red, I'm square, and I'm a brick. And straight away you're getting into a relationship with this content. And you're developing a relationship with your own unconscious, which is disguised as a brick in the wall.
Because it's not you talking, it's the brick talking.
It's the brick talking.
You're hearing the voice of the brick.
Your mind. Yeah. And through the dialogue, bouncing backwards and forwards and keeping it off the top of your head. Don't get too deep into it. Don't try and analyze it at the same time as have it. You see, just keep it light, off the top of your head. Allow the brick, allow the candlestick, the table, whatever it is, to talk back to you about their perception of things. Who's been through the house today? Oh, it's been a busy day today, says the table. I've had 3 people sitting down beside me. You see, and that is fantastic, because you're developing this ability to be fluid. You're going beyond your mind, the strict boundaries of what you know to be true, and you're developing this fluidity within your own perception, which is capable of looking around corners, literally.
I'll just interject. As you were talking about the brick, I was looking through the pane of glass in my window here in front of me, and I started to dialogue with the pane of glass. And it's like, well, I'm really not appreciated as the miracle that I am. People just look through me and don't see me. So anyway, just thought I'd share that.
Yeah, well, glass was considered a miracle at one time, along with mirrors and magnets. There was something magical about them.
See, guys, if we were involved in some horrible accident and lost a finger or 2 fingers off our hand, and the doctor said to you, listen, it's going to take 6 months to grow a new finger, you'd be delighted. You'd be saying, God, that's really quick. I can grow a new finger in 6 months. I'd be absolutely thrilled with that news. But this type of information, dealing with the unconscious, there's something in us that wants it now. I'm not content to wait 6 months, never mind 6 weeks. I want it now. And if it doesn't work now, I'm going to have a tantrum. You know, I'm going to throw it all out and say, oh, I can't do that. It's not working. Come on, give it a chance. Do you see? Allow yourself to imagine you're growing a fingernail out of the stump, at least. Allow it time to develop, and develop it will. As long as you don't try to get huge meaning out of it in the beginning. Allow it to be pretend, if you want to call it that. But stay with the aliveness, and don't jump in the deep end with a huge, big, active imagination and expect it all to suddenly become alive in front of your gaze. Begin with little things. Dream endings is fantastic. You can take a dream and just say, okay, well, if I was to allow this dream to end differently, what ending would I see in this dream? And just start to work it through in your mind, and then watch for the differences. Watch how the unconscious will suddenly say, haha, you wanted to end that way. Well, I have other ideas. I'm going to end it this way on you. Do you see? And watch for the little differences that appear between your will and the will of your unconscious.
And the
Does that make
dream,
sense what I'm saying there?
yeah, the dream is such rich material because it already has the aura of the unconscious attached to it. I mean, it has this aura of I did not create this, and this is an unconscious content. This is a petal on the side of the flower of Sandy's flower that was not us.
Yeah.
You know, so this dialoguing with dreams in the beginning is to me is the richest way to do it. And when I first started doing this myself, I called it the blessed hour because it really seemed like it was the richest part of my life. Even if I didn't like doing it, or it was boring, or boy, this is a hard dream. It's still afterwards. I don't think I've ever experienced anything as rich and feeling a sense of this is my task. This is my task. But anyway, that's a very good aspect to it. Just to go through, I thought you guys, if you want to, we could go through I just wanted to mention that practice 5 and from the last time, and the fact that there's this that's one of the best exercises is to go and ask the unconscious figure to show me the aliveness. Let me experience the aliveness. Let me experience the lumen natura and see if you can feel it. And if anybody can give descriptions of that, it'd be very interesting. I mean, helpful, I think. But the second half of he's got Giraffe's got it broken into 3 sections. His book. The first there's actually 4. The first one is sort of a theoretical explanation of the ally, which, by the way, he expands on immensely in the book called Healing the Wounded God. And at some point, we might want to go through at least the last half of that book because his partner wrote the first half, and I wasn't too crazy about it, but Jeffrey Raff in the last half, it's really an addendum to ally work. But anyway, he talks about the first conjunctio. Okay, the first conjunctio was the first 6 practices. That was where you unite what they called spirit and soul. The alchemists called spirit and soul, but it was actually uniting ego and the unconscious. Okay, somehow the figure in the unconscious and the ego now develop a relationship, but it's not very stable because it doesn't exist all the time. That's the first conjunctio. The second conjunctio is now where it returns to the body. So now spirit and soul then join with the body. Now this is when it's more stable. It's with you all the time. And you know, Marie-Louise von Franz said, someone who has become undivided or individuated is a person who lives in, and I think Sandy, you mentioned this, or somebody about, uh, and I think Stuart too, when you're out fishing, that you experience the imaginal world all the time, and that's really this, and it breaks through sometimes more powerfully than others, and that's this synchronistic moment of where the other world breaks through into this world. But you know, there's a pulsation on it because you can't have it all the time. But that's anyway. Is there any
Craig,
comments?
I remember just when you were speaking there about the light of nature. I remember a guy in one of the places I used to go to years ago, college, for all of this. He used to have a particular meditation he would use for people, and he would invite them to close their eyes and to move out into nature and to experience, you know, the fields and the dogs barking and the cats meowing and the birds settling if it was time of the day or whatever. And he would ask people to include all of this in their meditation, to hear you know, to hear the cows mooing and the goats bang and bleating, the sheep, and to include all of the animals of nature, and to go into the hedgerows and to experience the little field mice and the hedgehogs and all the little smaller animals like the frogs and everything that's alive all around us, and start to feel the energy of life as it breathes in and breathes out, and to experience, join in with this breath, to join with the breath of nature, not to be separate from it. And
Yeah, and
I
I
just
think,
remember that. It was a lovely meditation. It was really powerful.
well, and that's what I think is to me as a Northern European. I'm not a East. I'm not a. I can't really go into just becoming a dewdrop in the cosmic sea. I need all of that. I need this richness of feeling of the rooted world. I mean, and I think that's what appeals to me about Jung and appeals to me about alchemy rather than Buddhism, is that it doesn't forget the hedgerows, the mooing cattle, the bird song, you know, the lapping of the brook, you know, and the blowing of the wind, the wonderful feeling of just soft breeze, you know, in your hair or something. I mean, that's is there anything other more alive than that feeling? You know, a sense of aliveness.
Something
Yeah.
that relates, perhaps, I'm sure. Recently, I was involved in a Zoom call with these people from Rebel Wisdom, and they had a neuroscientist. I could go look up his name and put it in the chat. This neuroscientist specializes in the study of I think it's called the vagus nerve. And it's the longest nerve in our body from our brain, I guess, throughout to the body. And so I guess the gist of it is that we have to remember that our whole body is a big device or something, an energy receptor. And perhaps, you know, we have to think about the whole body to connect as well to the little animal in the hedgerow, and that, you know, not to be so limited in using our perceptions. And I guess these chakras that people are talking about relate to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's you know, I really think, you know, as far as the chakras, which I think you know, Stuart has said, you know, he's experienced the Kundalini and everything. To me, it's just having the whole body be an organ of perception, you know, is very appealing to me. One of the practices I really wanted to mention that he talks about in the second half of the Conjunctio is the one of knowing yourself, and now he's talking about not knowing that your individual characteristics rather than your identity to the ally. In other words, he says to know yourself is to know that you and the ally are twins, and that you're not identical, but you experience mutual perception when you're doing active imagination. So knowing yourself, and this was a very know yourself. I think that was what the wisdom of the Oracle of Delphi. They had a thing that said know yourself, and but they didn't mean the ego. They meant not to know. It wasn't important to know who you are, and Gerhard Dorn discovered this. It was important to know what you are, and what you are is the twin of the ally, or you're the vehicle of the self in the outer world. I mean, that is what he means by knowing yourself. That was practice 8, and the that was to me a really an interesting one. And here's what he wanted you to do in practice 8. He says he wanted you to go into an active imagination and ask the ally, how do you perceive me? In other words, ask the ally, what do you think about me? What's your perceptions of who I am and what I'm like? And tell me, I'd like to know, and then tell me who you think you are, So, I mean, in other words, this is knowing yourself. You're knowing that you're the twin of the ally, and that so this is this act of imagination of what he called mirroring. Is it? And now is that maybe? Can we hear from everybody about if like, let's just maybe like Steve, we haven't heard any of your wonderful questions lately. Do you have any wonderful questions for us? You're the best question asker in the whole world.
Oh, thank you, Craig. No questions. I'm just absorbing.
Yes. Well, yeah, I mean, it is, I'm sort of giddy from this morning, but anyway, that's practice 8. Now, I just wanted to go through these, and then maybe we can go quickly through Patrick's little essay on, it's pretty short. And practice 9 is love and the ally. Now this is a very interesting one. You go and ask the ally to share with you his feeling of love. So in other words, you're going and asking the ally to share with you his feeling of love, and you focus on that feeling of love as completely as possible. And
Craig,
then,
just for everybody
yes.
listening, could you just quickly refresh our memory as to who Patrick is?
Oh,
Just
well,
because people may be
Patrick
tuning in.
Patrick is the control of Stuart. Right, Stuart? Is that correct?
Yeah, the last Saturday before this meeting began, it was Craig and myself sat. In the past, I sat as for trance mediumship, and the spirit guide or spirit control that would come through is called Patrick. Now, he's described himself in different ways, but the name that he's sort of is happy with, that we use is Patrick.
Mm-hmm.
So for want of a better name, that's the name I use. So we had another sitting just before this meeting began again, where I would sit and I would go down into sort of an altered state and allow this control or this symbol of the ally to speak through me. And you know, he comes in with his full personality, character, you know, in varying degrees depending on how far I can get away from it. If I'm more conscious, well, then it blocks it. If I'm more out of it, then it gives it more freedom to occur. And there's a full-on dialogue. I think today was probably close on 3/4 of an hour, 50 minutes or something like that. Last week wasn't as long as that. It was shorter. But I haven't sat in about 10 years. So to do it last week was nearly like just a trial to see, well, will it work? But the control's name, the spirit guide's name is Patrick. So that's where the transcript came from. That's what the dialogue is. So Craig asked 1 or 2 questions along the way during it. But anyway, there you go. That's
Yes, and it is, you know, Patrick says that you know, and another thing I just want to mention is, do we need any more proof of the fact that there is another side? I mean, if there is another side, oh, Ivan's here. Just a second. Now, Gary, are you related to Ivan or not?
Yeah, he's my son.
Oh, okay. All right. I just wanted to know that.
One of twins.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Hi, Ivan. Nice to meet you or
Hi.
see you again.
Yes, I
But-
got my names mixed up.
Yes. Okay. Well, anyway, just the idea of, you know, what in the hell are we doing here? You know, I mean, the idea is to become undivided means that you participate in where you came from. You know, that there, you know, Jung said the whole question of existence is are you going to link to something infinite in yourself or not? You know, and if not, fine. But I mean, as far as Jung was concerned, that was the task of tasks. You know, and how do you do that? Well, you know, you have to realize that you're not the master in your own house. And if you're not the master in your own house, and if you aren't the master of the car that you're driving and someone else is driving it, then who is the master? You know, and what are you doing here? What's your purpose here? What's your task? You know, and you know, Jung and some of his, what he was saying, that is our task is to be, what Raf said is to be, or to know yourself is to realize that you have a twin. And he calls it the ally, but you can also, I think, call it the soul. You know, the reason he wanted to name it the ally is because he said it's not in the psyche. But maybe that's a way down the road. I mean, just an other being, the brick in the wall can be your other side for a while. But anyway, if the other world, to me, is manifest. Yes, go ahead, Stuart.
right. In spiritualism, and I know in America, I'm talking about UK English version of spiritualism. In America, I think it's all a little bit looser, with a sort of bit of fantasy thrown in on top. But the English spiritualism is sort of a fairly institutionalized institution. It's been doing it for many, many, many years. And trance mediumship is what it is over there. Now, it seems to serve a purpose for the people sitting. Over there in England, it's used for proof of survival and philosophy. And it's with some people, it's very, very, very interesting what comes through it. It's also the beginning of what they call physical mediumship. So the deeper trance states would be used for physical mediumship, which is proof of evidence. So you'd have physical phenomena, you know, levitation, apports, all sorts of amazing things, manifestation, a lot of stuff. And I've seen all this with my own eyes. It's real. But because I was more interested in the psychological journey, the ally for me, or the trance control for me, seems to have more worked along those lines to suit my mind. So my experience would be in this would suggest that whoever you are, that's what they will work with. They won't try and change you into something that you're not, or introduce you to a subject which is foreign to you. The ally will come and will speak in your language, in a means that you can understand for yourself. So it's very personal. It's as close as that to your own mind. And what they can't say to you directly will appear in your life as something that challenges you or guides you, as some sort of synchronicity. So even though you may not be able to sit down, or maybe you can sit down and produce a voice and have a direct dialogue, that dialogue is going on all the time, whether you know it or not, through synchronicity and through events. Because
He said the ones who don't get it, they help anyway through what you're talking about, through those events. You know, I mean that and the ones, and he also, you were talking about understanding, Stuart. He said that a better word is agreement and alignment. That Stuart has become in agreement or alignment with us, and he says that's a better word than understanding, uh, because understanding is with the head. Agreement and alignment is more related to a different center, than the head, you know. But anyway,
Hey, I've got a
yes,
drawing I wanted to share,
sure, yeah, definitely.
because this is the kind of thing that I've been working on for years. I've got a whole series of drawings about this kind of thing, about finding that ally, and for me, it's connected with my anima.
Mhm.
And this one is called "You Uncover Me."
Mm.
And the text, if you can't read it, it's, "As you uncover me, so I uncover myself." And this is what it feels like to me to be working with images, that I'm doing this dialogue, this internal dialogue, that is not a function of understanding. It's a function of being open to the image and seeing what the image unfolds in me.
Well, we can actually see this in some of the things Patrick says in his transcript, and Jung said these images, and Patrick told us that he lives in a world of seeing. I mean, and this reminded me of Jung said that realm is a realm of images, and that's why the dreams speak in images. They speak in images that are tied together in some sense of story. So I think there's also, the Jews used to say that God created the world because he loves a story. Okay. Well, that's also the becoming thing, that that the fairies, what's the one thing the fairies lack? It's the promise of youth, so they steal babies and leave a wizened fairy in its place because they want to bring the becoming thing back into the fairy hills, which is the promise of youth. So it's this aspect of, there's a realm of images in the invisible world that long for the light of ego awareness that human beings have evolved, but they can't allow this won't occur unless the ego, whom they are associated with, because you're born with it isn't a general one that to begin with. There's one being who's assigned to you and no other. It can't happen until you realize that you're not the master in your own house, and you try to find out who is the master. And then at that point, the dialogue begins, and you realize that this was the reason you were born, was to have this dial, among other things, like raising a family, having children. But that, normally after that, this is the second half of life task of reconnecting. Uh, there's two theories of where the word religio came from. One is to relink like the word of yoga, which means to connect two things, to connect the ego with the unconscious, and religio meant to connect the ego with the unconscious, and where Jung, there's another one Jung used, which was, it means to give careful attention to. Okay, well, this is the dream maker in Sandy's dream about the flower said, the breathing flower. When she lent her attention to the breathing flower, petals started to form on the other side, So behold the image. So this was the realization that you're not the master in your own house, that you're starting this dialogue.
Tim,
Yeah.
with respect to your drawing, you uncover me, your ally and anima, some sort of relationship. The you uncover me, to me, is about the divine feminine really wanting to come forward from this age of Pisces, and we're now moving into Aquarius. And there is this rising of the divine feminine. And, maybe Sandy's flower also connects us to the divine feminine, and that, it's been injured. It's an injured flower, perhaps, is the way to think of that, maybe. So just wondering, as an artist, if you looked back over all of your art, I know a lot of art that you've shown us has the feminine figure. And do you think this is this divine feminine that needs to be uncovered is throughout your work, perhaps? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was, well, I'm not sure who it was that said that artists are the antenna of the culture. And I feel very much like a lot of the stuff that I end up working on is a reflection of collective energy. To me personally, the feminine is really strong, and all my life I've been eager to make a connection with my anima, but I also recognize that there's a collective element to it, and sometimes I can't tell the difference between the two. But I think it's, in a way, it doesn't really make any difference. It's in a way, I think about the difference between a Oriental attitude and an Occidental attitude, where in the East, it's the person is more of a member of the body of the collective, and in the West, we are more individual. I really think this is a historical reflection on the development of consciousness as a whole, because I think when human beings first became aware of themselves, they recognized that they were part of a community. And it was only later on that the idea of an individual separate from the community arose, I think. And that dichotomy is still a part of our awareness, I believe. And I certainly think that every time I make an image, it has this capacity of being both personal and collective, very much like I think of a dream having significance both in my life and for the culture at large. And one of the things that I really take seriously as a responsibility that I have been given as an artist is to be the voice of the time. So I'm very much aware of that. And a lot of times I do a drawing like what you just showed, what I just showed. And I feel like, wow, this is so prescient to our moment in history. And I really think that the feminine, we have a hunger for the feminine in all levels. And maybe, and I'm curious about how that's different for a woman artist than it is for a man artist. But in my case, it's almost as if the individual and the collective blend together, because I'm not only a man, but I'm a participant in a patriarchal culture. And so I'm trying to force myself to come to terms with my own internal anima. And I'm also trying to force the anima to make an appearance in the culture.
Dissolve and coagulate, I mean, is kind of the idea of is one is the dissolving, is the separating out. This is what analysis means, is to separate out, or to bring the contents up from below. But I mean, that's the logos aspect. And then the eros aspect is the coagulate, bring it to back together again. And they're a rhythm, and we need both of them. And there's this idea of well, Jung said in the East, that the idea that they were feminine on the they were feminine on the outside and masculine on the inside. And he says in Western or Northern European hunting tribes, he said, because and this was because they lived in a perennial culture, one of where seasons didn't change much, and they were more involved in settled agriculture or herding than they were a hunting culture. And in Northern European tribes, it was they were masculine on the outside because of that, and feminine on the inside. And that's Jung's theory now, I would say. That's why he says in the East, they want you to show us the face you had before. And this is Joseph Campbell. Show us the face you had before you were born. And in the West, it's show me your own fully developed human face. And what Jung said about people in the West, that, since they were feminine on the inside, men and women, and masculine on the outside, he says, I can tell it by looking at their eyes, and they're dancing, But when he looked at the eyes of a person in India or Ceylon or something, they were very feminine on the outside, but he said their eyes had a masculine appearance. So I know people who can see a dog and just look at its eyes and tell you whether it's a female or a male. Yes, Stuart?
Yeah, no, just in relation to Tim's work there, the drawing, I think that's amazing, because you're providing a space for this to develop, this relationship to develop into. It's like you're providing a container for the material to enter into your life. You're giving it a space for it to become alive into you. And okay, so my method is to give it a voice. Your method is to give it form in some way. But in the benefit that I receive from sitting is enormous to me in my life. And I've no doubt the benefit you receive from doing that work intentionally is also enormous for you. And the more we come across the bridge and meet it halfway, the more we dedicate our work to this, the more it will manifest within us in some fashion. It doesn't have to, everybody's going to be different, experience it differently. Maybe we won't even see it, but it's still there. If we put the effort in, it will return that effort to us
You
as a
don't
mirror.
come empty-handed.
Yeah, exactly. So through pure numinosity, it'll bring aliveness to some area of your life. It'll bring aliveness to you in some area of your life. Now, what better way than doing it that way, through art? I think it's incredible because you're taking the words completely out of it, and it's pure. I would say that is much, much closer to the source than giving it a voice.
And it's speaking out of the heart and not the head too. I mean, when you're doing art, it's more there's very little head involved in it. My wife cannot draw faces and people, but she's incredible with composition, drawing, in other words, just mandalas and maybe anything like that. I mean, she just can do anything with a mandala. And she said, I'm not a very good artist. And then I look at this, and she might just take a canvas and just put colors on it, and it's just it's riveting, But I mean, yes.
Speaking of the voice of nature,
Yeah.
I just want to point out that I've got a couple of deer over across the street.
Oh, wow.
You see them in the yard there?
Yes, I do see them.
Life
It's
in
a
Montana.
beautiful venue. I've seen that in your video. You've got the big barn door up on top. That's
Right.
What a great space to sit.
Yeah.
I'm envious,
And to be able to look out on this kind of thing is really a treasure.
I'll tell you, one of the most beautiful drives that I've ever been on in my life is going from, I think it's Interstate 90 up to Helena, Montana. I mean, that is one of the most beautiful drives in the North America anyway. But anyway, do you want to go through a little bit on this dialogue
Hey,
from
Craig,
last time?
Can I just add or ask something here? So this is a bit of a marvel to me, the way that Tim has associated this ally to his anima, because of the way Jung associated the anima being the soul.
Yes.
And then you guys were talking a little bit about the what it is like for a woman, what it's like for a man, and connecting. I'm just curious because I'm still trying to grasp this, but is this witness our silent passenger, so to speak? I mean, what is it that identifies the witness as the witness? Is it because in Tim's case, if I were to take that literally, he's talking about his soul. So I'm just wondering, is it something that we're not quite attached to, that we want to become attached to, or is it something somewhat neglected? Because I know Tim has shared about maybe this neglect of the anima, almost, where he's reconnected or he's struggled with the anima. So I'm thinking, what is that witness? Is the relationship somewhat what is inferior in us, or what is lacking in us? Is that am I looking at that correctly?
Can you say that again? Your sound kind of got mumbled.
Oh, this idea that maybe the silent passenger we have, this witness, is maybe something inferior within us that needs to become more prominent, less neglected. I'm not sure how much was lost in transmission, but that was essentially what I was trying to ask.
I think that's right on, spot on.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that's absolutely what's going on. And there is a witness, by the way. That's the one thing that Jung said separated him from everybody else, is he believed there was a witness, that hears everything that we don't hear and sees everything we don't see, and then brings them back to us in dreams, reminds us of those things. And the anima is this witness, in Tim. And Tim, you had a beautiful dream last night about you were giving us that the anima in him were trying to take a forgotten images and to run them through a projector, that they weren't really sure what was on the film, which, you know, I didn't strike me until after we got done, or almost at the end, that the idea was that the anima and Tim were going to project images that they really weren't aware of what they were. So that the idea was not the content of the images, but the effect that they were going to project them, you know, onto the outer world, you know, which is really to some extent is what Jung said on the difference. Remember when there was this voice in the Red Book that Jung said, "What is this I'm doing? Is it science? Is it what is it that I'm doing here?" And a voice said to him, "It's art." And Jung resisted this. And the reason he resisted that is because he thought, and didn't know at the time, it linked with the transcendent function. It wasn't art, because art was an aesthetic expression. What it was rather the development of transformation of himself and his soul. You know, this was a process of symbol development, which created the third thing that had never been before been seen on land or sea. That was what Gary asked Patrick, "Do you evolve?" You know, and he paused for a moment, and Stuart said that he felt a certain sense of joy at the question, you know, because it was this idea of the third thing being born, the symbol, this new thing, that the becoming aspect of life. And anyway, I just I'm kind of the one thing is about the witness that that Steve was asking about. That was the question. Is it now? What was the two options that we had, Steve, of what the witness was?
Well, I was curious because when Tim said anima, I'm thinking soul. So his
Yes.
witness is his very soul. But then I'm also thinking about is the witness, because we have to go to a place where we can hear the witness. Is the witness something inferior in us that needs to be able to move into a more conscious place, or
Yes.
a more functional place? And so I'm just wondering, you know, I'm trying to understand how to look at this witness.
That's a better word
way.
the better word than inferior is that it's unconscious, you know, and that needs to be become conscious. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah, I was gonna sort of jump in there and say the way I would experience it is that the anima is the means through which nature brings its own expression to life. So
Yes.
so the potential that lies within us awaiting, it can await for all of eternity, if need be. You know, to it time is irrelevant, but it's within us as potential. So in doing this work, we are being facilitated by the anima to bring that natural voice within us into being. So that we no longer speak for ourselves. It is more nature speaking through us for itself. We become a natural. I become a natural man. You become a natural man. Tim becomes a natural man. Sandy becomes a natural woman. And we're no longer separated by thought. We're no longer separated by our own idea of, you know, we no longer organize it. Now it's organized for us. That's the way I would experience it, or the way I would answer that question.
And it's much neglected. I mean, and it knows it's neglected. And the idea of it being inferior is because the ego thinks it's the master. and it's totally neglecting this side of it that is the expression of life and the expression of nature in the world is being totally ignored. And that's why she says in several places in active imaginations of people who were very good at doing it, it cries out that I'm don't ignore me because of my darkness. I'm trapped in the mire, makes me so black. That means because we don't lend it attention. We're totally ignoring it. But she says, if you will lend me your attention, I will give into your hand the morning star. Now, this is the witness. This is the one who we're trying to, at least this is the realm, maybe not, that's the individual, that we're trying to establish relationship with. And we establish the relationship with this world through becoming an organ of perception and, and sharing, somehow developing a perception that is capable of perceiving this realm, you know.
So would it be fair to say that active imagination is a more overt method of individuation?
Well, yeah, active imagination is the beginning of the dialogue that allows us to become individuated, which means to be undivided, which means to be a tree that has leaves on both sides, or to become a living flower with petals on both sides. So that when we say individuated, that the very specific meaning of that is, and I can't wait to get the transcript of what Patrick said today, because he actually mentions that a little bit about undividedness, where he's talking about undivided. But anyway, that undividedness means the ego is broken away from nature. But that's very important and necessary, because now it is this light to which the beings in Patrick's world are attracted to. There is this attention now that they can lend the anima to make these entities in that world ability to speak. Stuart is such one of these entities that allows Patrick voice in the other world. And that he couldn't do it without the light of ego awareness that was broken away from nature. If he was one of the deer standing out across the street from Tim's house, they don't have the light of ego awareness that these beings can lend to and use this wonderful, mysterious thing of words and grammar and what we say is kind of this music of voice that ripples out into thoughts and ideas that don't last. There's just a fleeting thing about them, but they actually allow this the process of growth, a growth that's outside the womb.
Thanks,
Craig,
guys. I know I'm still catching up.
Oh, well, I don't think there's any. We're all on the same path. It's nobody's. I don't think. That's why I asked Patrick. Does the journey ever end? Does the exploring ever stop? Go ahead, Stuart.
No, just add to that. I know you want to move on. The image that comes to mind is a wire on a telegraph pole, or from an electrical wire coming into your house. That wire has to be connected all the way through. There's no point having a break halfway along it. But the wire is one thing, but the current that's going to run through it is a totally different thing. So we build all these relationships. It's like hanging the wire up, but the current that comes through it is a totally different thing. So is it about individuating? Well, maybe it is for some, and maybe it's about something else for somebody else. But either way, it's going to bring a more wholeness into our lives just by participating in it, because it can't not. It's coming from the bigger. That current, when it hits us, is going to add to us in some capacity. So anyway, there you go. Craig, you want to move on, do you, to that? Or
Well, yeah, what I thought we'd do is maybe just for the last 20 seconds, we just run through this transcript a little bit. I'll just hit the highlights. And please, everybody jump in and talk, because I'm really rattling on today, aren't I? I must be worked up or something. Yeah. Okay, well, anyway, he says,
Craig?
yes.
Well, I do want to say that I appreciate your amplifications in words. It really adds for me. And just a small thing, so far in my experience with active imagination, it's been mostly images, and it's images that I just watch, but I'm also in it and participate, and they grow and they speak to me somehow. And there's a little bit of maybe sometimes words I hear or question I ask. But anyway, so far that's my experience. So that's why it's really kind of cool sometimes to hear sometimes what I experience in an image or an experience, and then it's amplified with the things you guys share. So.
Well, I think in that case, then you have made the image that longs for the light concrete and real in the outer world. That's the beauty of amplification and of taking your drawing. And if you take those images and make them concrete and real in the outer world, you've added the element of relentless memory to it. So now it becomes part of the relentless memory means that it's part of your personal myth now. I mean, that you're developing your own myth of meaning that is totally your own. You don't do that if you let the images just fleet away and don't amplify them and don't draw them and everything. They just become unopened letters, that we don't. But anyway, I just thought we'd go.
Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to add one thing Miles said too about the flower, how each petal represented a person and the collected petals were people. And that really spoke to me too. And that's just the wonderful experience, like in a group like this, everybody adds, just my experience is it just adds. And that's part of that amplification. That's
the blind man looking at the elephant. I mean, everybody gives a little bit different picture, and pretty soon you have some idea what the elephant, the blind people, or the people who can't see, which is all of us, have some idea of what they're encountering here, and especially when it's the invisible world we're exploring. We need all the help we can get, But anyway, here's now. I just wanted to read. There's just a little bit of here about the joining of minds. Now this is in Jeffrey Ra is saying, and talking about talk to the brick wall. I mean, the idea is the brick in the wall is to talk about the joining of minds, and Patrick talks about this. He says. After he was sort of apologizing for the fact that it took him a little bit of a time to appear, that there needed that all that needed to be settled. He said, we need to try to steady his mind and settle for all that needs to be settled. And he says, you see, my friend, there are many aspects to the joining of two minds in this world. It's somewhat similar, and he mentioned this today, to you approaching a friend and speaking with them. But there is also the need for a great deal of understanding in order that one mind might become, as it were, the other. In other words, to switch. Now Stuart said that after the switch had happened, suddenly he thought that he possibly was at Patrick's home, because he saw a greenness. Go ahead. What do you think, Stuart? Why don't you describe it?
I was today, when I came back out of it, I was quite deep, but when I came back out of it, one of the images I was left with was just a stone. I could see part of a stone wall and greenery around it. And it was just there in the background of my mind. And when I went, it was sort of imposing itself into me a little bit. But when I turned my attention to it, it sort of released a certain amount of luminosity. And it was just so heartfelt. It was suddenly, I dropped right down into my heart. And I had this love, joy, energy open up in me. And it's like, well, okay, I felt he was showing me the place where he was familiar with. And that was from, see, these symbols are living symbols that have lived and have an understanding of our world. They are full personalities as they manifest within us. Now, in the very beginning, it could be a symbol of an abstract form, a psychological symbol, something like that we see as an abstract symbol. But as soon as we start connecting with them, they take on their own being, their own character, and they begin to flesh themselves out. And I think that's what, these little proofs are given along the way. The experience for me has proven itself over many, many years as being something.
You were a little bit breathless as you talked about it, and you said you said you have no idea the difference between the heart and the head. I mean,
maybe we could try to get some of that video into this meeting.
Yes, definitely.
So people can see the process of what it is. I don't know if that's possible or not. I'm sure.
Yeah, I think you could maybe do clips or something, or we can look at a transcript too.
Yeah.
But anyway, he's talking about the joining of the minds. Now, the reason I'm reading this is it's so relevant to what Jeffrey Rapp is talking about. It's almost like Jeffrey Rapp talking. He says, as we approach your world, and this answers so many questions that we've been talking about here. He says, as we approach your world, we are drawn to the light that is emitted by your being. By the way, hi, Kevin. We are drawn to the light that is emitted by your being. You see, we also need to prepare, as our friend has explained, as we move towards that which we once were, as we take on more of the characteristics which become familiar to us. Now, Stuart was just talking about this. We come more into being, you might say, that in order to achieve that joining, there must be an openness within the person to whom we are drawn to. You see, my friend, the message we bring to this world, your world, is none other than a message of love and acceptance of that which is deemed to be unacceptable. For indeed, the only real difference between you and our own being is that we have some knowledge of death. And indeed, through the letting go of that which seemed important in order that we might grow more within our new environment. You see, my friend, life does not end as you approach that great transition. Rather, in some respects, it accelerates. And then as you finally take your last breath in this world and move into the arms of those who await you, physically, of course, you will experience those whom you once loved, and it is their purpose to welcome you and reorientate you so that you might begin to understand more deeply that's which you are becoming closer to. So anyway, I mean, he's, Patrick, one question I ask him is, what did you learn from, I mean, he's saying that he was once a human being, and now he's moved on. So he's an ancestor. And he has that wonderful passage in there that all they had back then was nature. and we've lost nature. But so all we have is our inner nature. So he says we
Craig,
sometimes think more deeply. Yes,
yeah,
go ahead.
particularly for us men, you've said it numerous times that we are sort of a little bit, we're more disconnected than the feminine. You know, the feminine is more rooted into the earth and certainly affected by the cycle of the moon. And so when we are talking about the first conjunctio is mind and spirit, ego and anima. And then the second conjunctio is ego, anima, and body. Is it correct for me to think, well, the body is not only my body, but connecting to the earth and
Yeah, the body is the
body
earth.
of the Mother Earth?
Yes, exactly. It is. It's when we're talking about the feminine and the masculine too, we're not talking about actual living creatures out in humans. We're talking about aspects of an energy flow between dissolve and coagulate. One has to do with the nurturing aspects of and the life-giving aspects. The other one has to do with, I really think, with ego formation, and so that's why it's so disconnected. Go ahead, Stuart.
Sorry, no, I just sent a message that I need to leave. So
Okay, all right. Well, we love you,
Stuart.
Stuart,
You.
just so you know. Okay, we'll see you
Thanks.
later. Okay, bye. Okay. Well, anyway, that is well, we only got about 9 minutes left here. Do you guys want to just have a general open discussion here of just everybody unmute and just
Uh,
say what's on your mind?
yeah, can I perhaps add something to
Yes,
to the
Kevin,
soul?
go ahead.
I think Jung says that the body is the vessel for the soul, and the soul is the vessel for the spirit.
Yes, that's
So I
beautiful.
don't know if, yeah, so I don't know if that helps. So
That does help.
I
So,
sort of
the body, of course, is the feminine, and it is always expressed as a vase, or the alchemical vase is shaped like the womb, and that's where the birth is going to take place. So
Could you just repeat that again?
yes,
Just
Kevin, why don't you repeat that again?
yeah, the body is a container for the soul, and the soul is a vessel for the spirit. So
Yes.
there is an image I think Greg sent about in the book Windows on Eternity. There is an image there where there's an image of a girl and the spirit is blowing into her, which is a symbol of the soul image, obviously within. So it's like the body, soul, and spirit. You need all those three to function, or you know.
Well, yeah, and something very interesting that Vera von der Heid said was that both men and women have anima,
Mm.
and both men and women have spirit, but the anima in the woman is more conscious, and the anima in the man is unconscious. Where in the woman, her spirit side or logos side is more unconscious, and for a man, the spirit side is more part of his conscious. It's just a little more conscious than it is. So anyway, go ahead. Somebody
Yeah,
said,
I think we can see this in nature as well, how the cells divide by themselves, but at the same time also creates a whole, so that there is a parallel processing going on. So a cell divides itself, which is the logos aspect, is discriminate, has different
yes,
functions, but at the same time it creates this wholeness by the end of it. So logos and eros sort of cannot, they coexist. You cannot have one without the other. You can have one in the shadow, but it will create a more destructive aspect. So, but in nature, you see this everywhere, where you have logos and eros, whether it's in plants, humans, or planets, or whatever you want to. So
It's a very beautiful image. The cell divides, and yet, so that's the aspect of logos, the separation. Yet it is held together by eros. So there's this simultaneous process of cell division, separation, and being held together, eros, that occurs in us, and it's, that's a beautiful way of putting it, Kevin. I love that.
There's a similar concept in some meditation that I've been doing around having no head. And the idea is that what you see just depends on the distance from what you're looking at it. So you'd see an entire person as an individual if you're looking at it from like, a distance, right? Or take a table, for example. A table is a table from like 4 feet away. But if you zoom in really close, it's particles of wood. And if you zoom into those particles of wood even closer, it's atoms. When you zoom into atoms, it's electrons and quarks, and you keep going until you essentially get to nothingness. And actually the idea is that for yourself, if you were to look inwards towards yourself, as you get closer and closer to that nothingness, that is where the self is, because you can't look in on yourself.
It's pure.
Yeah, that's the great Hindu myth, where Shvetaketu comes back to see, after he's learned everything at the yoga school, he comes back to see his father, and he thinks he's very wise. And his father's sitting under this fig tree, and he says, Shvetaketu, bring me one of those figs. So he brings him the fig. And he says, Shvetaketu, split the fig in half. So he splits the fig in half. He says, what do you see there? He says, I see all these tiny little seeds. And he says, Shvetaketu, take one of those seeds. And he takes the seed. He says, split the seed in half. So he splits the seed in half. He says, what do you see there? He says, I see nothing. And he says, out of that nothing, this great banyan tree came. Out of that nothingness, this great universe came. And out of that nothingness, you came. Thou art that, Shvetaketu. You and, there's identity between you and this invisibleness.
That's
and
pretty
see,
cool.
Yes, well, and the twinning, where this voice that Steve was talking about, the witness, is invisible. It's nothingness. Yet that nothingness and you, there's an identity between it. It's not really a nothingness. It's the pleroma or shunyata. It's a nothingness that's full of potentiality. That's full of latentness. And the only way the latentness can be, it's imprisoned there. It's held in prison in the unconscious. And the only way that it can be released, and it cries out for release, is for you to give it attention. Lend the light of attention to it, which is the cooking of alchemy. I mean, that's the incubating and the brooding. You lend attention to something, it warms up. Anyway, we don't have much time, but does everybody want to have a closing word of wisdom before we leave? How about let's see, who hasn't spoken? Gary, let's hear your closing word of wisdom.
Right. Well, I think so much of this practice rests on being able to change state. And, since we're mostly men here, our inferior function is typically the sensing function. And if you still have the link to the active imagination document that I put up in there, there's an MP3 called the Heart Chakra Dance, and it's meant to be danced with, but it's a visualization. And, and so the dance is like just moving and feeling like whatever you're doing. Because I think the idea is that along with this visualization, you're also doing all this sensing through your body. And so, because if you're really going to be able to do these practices, you really have to be more in the body than the mind. I recommend that one for kind of like a pre-exercise to the active imagination. I find it to be a really good warm-up. I mean, I feel like I'm going to change state then.
I wish you would forward that dream that you sent to me to everybody, because
Sure.
that was wonderful. Plus the fact that you used Reiki and some number symbolism, and it just, wow, exploded. Well,
Yeah.
Tim, you are sitting in the most wonderful place in the world. Do you have any closing wisdom for us?
No, I'm just so appreciative of this. I've been on this journey myself for such a long time, trying to have this dialogue with the ally or with the anima, and it's just so great to plug into other people who respect that process. I'm just really delighting in this, and I look forward to more.
Well, there's things percolating in me that would never have happened without this group. I'll tell you that. Steve, do you have any closing thoughts or?
Nothing other than to say ditto what's being said.
Okay. Okay. How about you, Sandy?
Me too.
Okay.
Ditto.
Ivan?
I'm really enjoying this. Yeah, I don't have anything to add.
How about Miles? Do you have anything?
Yeah, well, so it kicked off with Tim's art, You Uncover Me, and then you led us into, you stated that the Holy Spirit feels neglected. I'm trapped in the mire and being neglected. If you pay attention to me, I will give you the morning star. And what that triggered in me is that for a little while now, I learned that in one of the ancient languages of the Bible, Sanskrit, the pronoun for the Holy Spirit was initially feminine. And every time I hear people describe the Holy Spirit as he, it rings like a cymbal clanging. And this change in the pronoun from feminine she, the Holy Spirit, to he, to me is part of this Holy Spirit feeling neglected.
You want me to tell you a wonderful thing Jung said about the gender of the Holy Spirit? Okay. The gender of the Holy Spirit was because it was the third of four functions. In the quaternity, you have the superior function and the auxiliary function. Then you have the inferior function, and you had the third function, which could be conscious or not conscious. He says, if the third function is conscious, it's male. If the third function, which is the Holy Spirit, is unconscious, it's female. And that's why he said that the gender of the Holy Spirit sometimes is spoken of as Sophia, and sometimes it's male. So
Wow, what a subtle.
isn't that a beautiful thing that he said? I mean, it's I just thought that was just like this when I heard it,
Yeah, and I
well,
would say
anyway,
Miles,
you've had that question for so long. I finally got the answer for you.
Thank you. So, and the thing is, I don't believe in mainstream Christianity there's many people thinking about that.
No, it was so beautiful. Well, Kevin, you got the last word. What do you guys say?
Maybe, yeah, just to add to it, Edward Edinger, I can't pronounce his name correctly, but he creates the term, he doesn't create it, but he adds the term Holy Spirit once the ego is connected to the self. So as long as it's separate, there is a separation between the ego and the self, he doesn't apply that term. But as soon as there is a connection, when the bridge happens, then he applies the term. Holy Spirit, because you are no longer divided, but and so
It's
on.
something very similar to Hermes, the messenger between the upper and the
Yeah.
lower worlds.
Yes.
Well,
yes,
anyway, this
perfect.
has been very fruitful. I hope I feel like I was a little bit all over the place, but I'm sorry.
It was beneficial, Craig. Very
Yeah, I like it
beneficial.
when you're giddy.
Yes, I
Yeah.
was giddy.
Me
Sorry.
too.
Okay,
It was
well, have
great.
a wonderful Saturday, everybody. It looks like it's good weather, except in Alberta, it looks a little cold. Okay, see y'all later. Thank you
Bye.
so much.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye.
guys.